Welcome everybody back to another episode of Treknicity Live, the show where I talk about pretty much what I want to talk about, Star Trek. Yeah, you name it, I'll talk about it. Why? Because no topic here on Treknicity Live is taboo. I'm your host, Lars Scenza, and I'm coming to you from somewhere beyond the cosmos. In this episode, I'm going to talk about some of the original series. And it was suggested to me today that perhaps I should cover my particular take and feeling on the different series. So if we're going to do that, we've got to start where it all began with the original series back in 1966. Now, I'm not going to go into too much about the technical stuff because anybody who has dyed in the wool Trekkie or Trekker knows all about the ins and outs of how it began, where it came from, who created it, who wrote it, who started it, and all that stuff. So I'm going to kind of go more off of how I feel and what I think and what it means to me. Now, before I get started, somebody asked me, what does Treknicity mean? And believe it or not, Treknicity is more than just a catchy title. It is actually a portmanteau of two things that are very important to me. One obviously being Star Trek, and the other one being pretty much it is part of my ethnicity as a geek. So like I said, it's a portmanteau. You put them together, Trek and ethnicity, you get Treknicity. There you go. See, everybody knows now. That being said, I am going to talk about how I got into Star Trek and how I started watching it. This goes back to when I was about 6 years old, and for those who don't know me or don't know how old I am actually 44 years old, so it's been a long time that I've been watching Star Trek. One of the few things that I actually had some enjoyment of, when my parents were still married, is that my dad would watch Star Trek on reruns every night. And of course, I wanted to be around my dad, which meant being around Star Trek, and cool, we're into it. I loved it. I didn't matter what it was. It didn't matter to me what they were doing, where they were, what the story was. All I cared about was those guys up on the screen. My partner, my creative partner and hetero life mate Patrick said to me today. He says, "Make sure you mention out how much Shatner sucks." Well, as an actor, William Shatner is not a bad actor. He's a method actor, and he has his own way about things and whatever. And of course, he to me, in my eyes, he will always be James T. Kirk, no matter what role he plays or has played. And the cool thing about this whole situation was that Star Trek wasn't just a TV show. I mean, back in the '60s. When they were kind of trying to get through these things, and they were also, it's like, oh hell, okay, we're gonna get through one season, okay, we're getting canceled. Hey, people stepped in and saved it, brought it in for another second season. They went through that, and then ended up getting canceled again, and they were saved for a third season. And after that, basically the studio just ran it into the ground. But what is so interesting is that after it went off the air in 1969, it basically got farmed out. It was put into syndication. It was sold to TV stations around the country and later on around the world that they could show basically the rerun episodes. And of course, what was really cool is that the people who hadn't seen it in its initial first run could now see all the episodes and become Trekkies and Trekkers. That's where I came in because, of course, I was born in the early to mid '70s, and that's it's like by the time I'm watching it, it's like 78, 79, right around the time just after the motion picture had come out. But of course, I'm sitting there watching it, watching it with my dad, and it was just one of those things where nothing could go wrong. I mean, it was great. The stories were fantastic. It was, swashbuckling adventures in space, or the big wagon train to the stars, as it's been called. But the whole thing is that I loved how it made me feel. It was so much excitement. It was so much entertainment. For the lack of a better phrase, and this is actually stolen from one of the names of the episodes. Basically, Star Trek to me and my own was bread and circuses. I loved watching the show. I still love watching the show, even more so now that they've done the special editions where they've cleaned up some of the the old cheesy sets and planets and stuff like that, and replaced it with the model ship with CGI. Just a fantastic job, and of course, it just helps you get more immersed in that universe. I love watching Star Trek. I love being a part of it. I know I've talked about being up and down about how Star Trek is this whole thing where for a while I went into the dumps about it. I kind of had to go at how I felt about Alec Peters and what he did to Star Trek fan productions. And I know that I've kind of been bagging on it a little bit, but look, seriously, nothing geek wise gets me going more than Star Trek. I've written fan fiction. I've designed 3D characters. I've rendered 3D models. I've written stories. I have you name it, pretty much. And I've watched everything 1,000 times over. And so you go back to the original series and go back to the first season. Okay, now first of all, I have to tell you my absolute favorite episode of the original series is Balance of Terror. Okay, the first time we see the Romulans, me personally, I love the Romulans as a race. And to see Mark Leonard play the Romulan commander, who then of course goes on to play Sarek for the rest of his time with Trek, that being Spock's father. It was really cool because you got to see this really, really good dichotomy of a battle between two seasoned commanders, and in the end, somebody had to lose. Unfortunately, somebody had to lose, and of course, spoiler alert, it is the Romulan commander because, of course, if Enterprise had lost, well, there wouldn't be movies and other series and stuff like that. But I loved how they could take, these stories. They could make you forget that the sets were cheap or cheapish. We are talking about, it was probably pretty advanced for the 60s, but when we look at them now, you're like, oh God, man, you had to imagine a lot. You had to pretend a lot, I bet. I can imagine George Takei and Walter Koenig and Nichelle Nichols, and even Leonard Nimoy sitting there on the bridge, basically flipping switches, pushing buttons, making lights go, watching and having to pretend all that. They had to imagine that they were on a starship, that they were on the whole thing was powered by a supercomputer that could give them access to pretty much all this knowledge and all these cool things. So they did that. They made you believe that the Enterprise computer was a sentient AI. In the days and years before we really truly understood what an AI was. And of course, there was an episode where they have Dr. Daystrom come on, and he brings on the experimental M5 computer, which is a more advanced AI, which then, of course, shows that, hey, whoa, when you blur the lines a little bit too much between technology and humanity, some bad things can happen. Just such classic stories. City on the Edge of Forever. When they got to watch them jump through a paper mache, cardboard, whatever, a guardian, as they traveled into the past, chasing after a deranged Dr. McCoy. You just were sold. You were sold on the story. You didn't have. They didn't have to sell you much. It was an easy turnaround, and then of course. That being said, actually, I just recently listened again to the audiobook of I Am Spock, which is one of my favorite books. And, Leonard Nimoy talking about how, well, look, this is, I don't know how long this is going to last. I'm going to do everything I can to make as much money. So he would accept, sessions on the weekend. He'd go out and meet with fans. He'd be flown across the country. He'd do his whole thing. He'd wrap up. He'd get back on a Sunday night, go crash on the couch in his office, and then get up in the morning, get on his go to wardrobe and makeup, and bam, do it again for a week, So, like, it elevated these guys to, like, near God level. And, you're like, wow, that's nuts. But, of course, they are forever lodged in the annals of time. Anybody who's a Star Trek fan, even if you're more of a TNG fan, which, I am. TNG was always my favorite, and I actually look forward to talking about it next episode. But you might be a DS9 fan, you might be more of a Voyager person, you might be more of an Enterprise person, except for Season 3. No bueno. Or you might have come into Star Trek at Discovery, who knows? Or even the Abrams first movies, which I won't talk about right now. The whole thing about this is that it doesn't matter whether you are you're sort of more into a particular spinoff or the original series. Some people are like, no, there's no Star Trek other than the original series. Well, I'm sorry, there is. But even if you are like that, there are still a ton of great stories that you can go back and watch. I mean, thank God for for Amazon Prime and Netflix. I can watch Star Trek anytime I want. I can watch the original series. In fact, I got it in my playlist. And, you can go watch TNG, Voyager, DS9, Enterprise. Discovery, unfortunately, is still just on the CBS All Access service. So, that being, with that, whatever, it's still a kick-ass series. There's a still kick-ass franchise, in fact. Go back. I want you to go back. If you haven't seen the original series, go back. The first season to me was the best. Second season was pretty good. Third season, they did start with an episode called Spock's Brain, where Spock's brain is stolen. Okay, whatever. But they still told some fantastic stories into the third season, especially, Turnabout Intruder, which I think was the last episode of the series before they got canceled for good. There's the Enterprise incident, where we get to see some of the things that were established for later canon, like the proof that the Klingons and the Romulans had a technology exchange, because the Romulans have D7s. Which of course that makes sense. So when Star Trek 3 comes out, it's no big surprise that the Klingons have the bird of prey, and everybody's like, well, it was a Klingon ship. No, it's not. The Klingons were never that obsessed with birds in that nature, or birds of prey of any kind. The Romulans. I mean, the way it's been explained is that the Romulan homeworld of Romulus was dominated by large birds of prey. So, of course, when the ancient or proto-Vulcans who left Vulcan prior to the massive civilizational destruction way thousands of years ago, they finally just said, "Screw it, we're getting out of here," and they take off, and they go to this planet and they find Romulus, and it's temperate, and they're these big birds, and so their society, their culture is born around it, and so of course part of the exchange is that they gave the Klingons a working bird of prey ship with a functional cloaking device, which is how the Klingons ultimately get the cloaking device. And I know I'm rambling a little bit here. I'm kind of going bouncing back and forth. I'm giving you little tidbits of how these things happen, and all the things that happen in the episodes and stuff like that, and how I feel about all that. Look, I am a Trekkie and a Trekker. I don't care how you say it. I don't find offense at the word Trekkie, but some people do. Some people who are my friends, who have worked in Star Trek, take offense to the word Trekkie. That being said, whatever your fancy is, that's fine. So, I want you to just go and watch. Just watch it. Give it the first season a go. You'll love it. If you make it to Balance of Terror, I think you'll be able to stick out more. You'll be able to stick out more of the episodes, and you'll really enjoy it. Hey, to paraphrase Fry in the episode "Where No Fan Has Gone Before" in Futurama. There is an episode where Spock gets high on spores and smacks Kirk around. There's an episode of Who Mourns for Adonis where basically Apollo is the Greek god Apollo is basically trapped on this planet, and they entice the Enterprise. They trap them there. They hold them. And, it's a whole just watch it. It's good fun. But the guy who played that Apollo came back in the first episode of Star Trek Continues, which was a fantastic fan production. Sorry, you want to talk about, some people talk about how Axanar was great. Prelude to Axanar was actually a really good production. I love it. But Star Trek Continues, fantastic. That and Star Trek New Voyages with James Cawley. Oh, man. I'll do an episode on the various fan productions. I'll need to do some research because I know there's more than just those two. Just really good stories, really good crossovers. Of course, in the original series, we get to see, which was quite controversial at the time. We got to see the first interracial kiss on TV, which was between Uhura and Kirk, and so yeah, definitely go and watch the original series. I think you'll like it, even though it is cheesy in some places because they have to stretch the imagination quite a bit due to budgetary constraints. I believe you'll like it. If you haven't watched it, please do go watch it. And if you want to, talk to me about it, I'll be more than happy to talk your ear off about Star Trek. Kind of like I'm doing now. That being said, I'm going to wrap this up here. So do us a favor. If you like what I'm doing here, please click the like and subscribe down here and click the little notification bell so that you know when a new episode is coming out. We've got Dragons of Adrian, a campaign diary, which is wrapping up. I believe we've got maybe a couple more episodes of that for the first season. And then by then, I plan to have the full-fledged Treknicity, the produced series, up and rolling so that you can watch more about not just hearing me ramble about how I feel about Star Trek. I can get a little bit down in the nitty-gritty of stuff like that. So, that being said, I want you to have a great time, have a great day, great night, whatever. And as always, rock out. Oop, there it goes. Rock out with your Spock out. All right? So, see you later, folks.